Good morning, good afternoon to those of you who are joining us today. Thank you. We thank you for your time. We know you're busy. I'm Gail Roden. As you heard, I'm an assessment consultant here at Pearson. I work on the healthcare side, which includes our private practitioners, university customers, those who work in hospitals and clinics. And before I went to work for Pearson, I was I still am a neuropsychologist, but I was in private practice for about 10 years, and I did nothing but assessment. So the WAIS was one of my foundational measures when I saw my adolescent and adult clients. So I'm really excited to be talking to you today about the new WAIS-5. Let's start by just a quick rundown of what's new, and then I'll expand on each of these as we go through the next half hour. Of course, there are updated norms with the new revision. We're going to talk about the reduced administration time, which I think will be a big favorite. There's a new test structure and new subtests. We're not going to talk too much about those because there previously was a full webinar on the new subtests and on the new test structure, including new ancillary index scales. And you can go back and watch those in recorded version. We'll touch on the special group studies. We'll talk a little bit about expanded clinical utility and the improvements made in the user experience. And then I'll have some more information for you on upcoming detailed webinars and additional resources. Let's talk first about the updated norms. We know these are important due to the Flynn effect, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But just to remind you, research has shown us that there's about a 3-point increase in full-scale IQ every 10 years. So if you think about the fact that the WAIS-4 was published in 2008, and you start to do the math, you can see where this is one of the older tests that may tend to overestimate some of your clients' scores. So it's really important to move to the newest version of a test, particularly when it's been a significant length of time since the previous revision was published. Now, the normative samples for WAIS-5 were collected in 2023 and 2024 so that they reflect our recent shifts and trends, primarily demographic changes, changes in the makeup of our population here in the US, and they do match the most recent census on 5 key demographic variables. I will mention that one reason why the WAIS was delayed in coming out with the newest version, and probably the primary reason, was, you guessed it, COVID. We had gathered about half of our normative sample before COVID, and then when COVID hit, we had to shut that down because we weren't doing face-to-face testing. After the worst of COVID was gone and we were able to resume norm collection, we had a decision to make as to whether we took the half that we had gotten prior to COVID and just filled in the second half and aggregated them to make our norms, or whether we started over. And that was a long discussion with a lot of things taken into account. And we decided that the smartest thing to do, since we were beginning to see changes due to COVID, was that we start over and collect all of the data post-COVID crisis. So that's why, one reason why we're late, but it's also why we have what's the word I'm looking for? Confidence that our norms are going to represent the folks that you see now. Let's talk first about administration time. We are going to take about 45 minutes to obtain the full-scale IQ. I believe that was the median time in our normative sample when we did our standardization. And to get the full-scale IQ requires 7 subtests. So 7 subtests contribute to the full-scale IQ, but you need to administer 8. You need to administer digits forward, even though it's not going to contribute to the full scale, because when we norm the test, we administer digits forward prior to digit sequencing. Digit sequencing will contribute to the full scale IQ. So don't worry about it. Digits forward takes about 1 minute, but you do need to be sure to give it prior to digit sequencing so that you're doing things exactly the way we did them when we standardized the test. If you want to get all 5 of the primary index scales, it will take you right around 60 minutes. And you'll also need to do that digits forward prior to digit sequencing. So you need a total of 10 subtests. You'll be giving 11, but you only need 10 to get those 5 primary index scores. Now, some of you may be going, wait a minute, did you say 5 index scales? Because the old WAIS-4 only had 4. Yes, that's a change. The new test structure, to get the full-scale IQ, you are going to have tests that contribute from 5 index scales, okay? Perceptual reasoning on the WAIS-4 has been split into 2 scales, visual spatial and fluid reasoning. We've been shown by factor analysis that this 5-factor solution is by far the most important, the one that works the best with the data we have. And it's not surprising given that it's the same as WAIS-5. So if you've been giving WAIS-5, you're used to this. If you haven't, and this is new, I'm going to say a little more to help you get used to the change. Notice that there are 2 subtests, these are in blue, that contribute to the verbal comprehension component of full scale, and 2 fluid reasoning tasks. And then there's 1 test, subtest each in the areas of visual spatial, working memory, and processing speed. And you'll notice down at the bottom that one substitution is permitted when you're deriving the full scale IQ, but only 1. Okay, that's because if you administer more than 1 substitution, you're getting content that's significantly different from what we used in our standardization, and it can't really be compared to the norms that we're providing you. So 1 substitution only. Let's look next at those 5 primary index scales. Again, perceptual reasoning has been broken out into visuospatial and fluid reasoning, and each of the 5 primary index scales has 2 subtests that contribute to it. Notice on the bottom it says that subtest substitution is not permitted for any of the primary index scores. The reason being, again, if you were to substitute 50% of what's contributing to that scale, it's going to be far too different from the comparison you're making in our standardization data. So no substitutions permitted. If you do, Q Global will not give you a primary index scale. Now, that's not to say if for some reason you have to do this, you can't. There are substitutions available, but for any primary index scale in which you make a substitution, you'll only be able to look at qualitative information. And that can be very important. But just remember, you won't get a score when you're doing scoring. To help you a little bit in getting used to these new primary index scales, we have these 2 nice little cartoons and descriptions that tell us about the 2 new index scales. And these are thanks to our good friend Jim Holdneck. In thinking about the visuospatial index, the analogy is this requires the skills that it takes to be a good architect. So you need to be able to use visual information to build a geometric design that matches a visual model. So you have visual information as input, and you see what the visual output is supposed to look like, and you have to turn that input into the output. So think about block design and visual puzzles, because those are going to be the 2 subtests that contribute to this index. On the other hand, fluid reasoning requires the skills that make you a good detective. You have to be able to use visual information once again, but now you're going to use that information to identify a common theme or concept or rule, and then you're going to take that rule and apply it to new visual information in order to select the correct response. So think about matrix reasoning and think about figure weights and how you come up with a concept or rule and you apply it, and that tells you which is the correct response option. Here's a very busy slide, and we're going to take a little bit of time to go over it because it's very important. The columns that you see, the first 5 columns starting on the left-hand side, those are the same as the index scales that I've been showing you. And if you look across the top row of those first 5 columns, you'll see that each of them, in each of those areas, we have an expanded ancillary index scale. So the verbal expanded is also a great measure of crystallized intelligence. It's often used if you have folks with visual impairments or who are blind, who can't take the visual tasks. This is a great way to gather more information on their cognitive ability. It's also often used with gifted clients to get more information on their verbal problem solving and their crystallized intelligence. Expanded visuospatial, you can see, also has 4 subtests in it, 4 subtests for the expanded fluid. Expanded working memory has a tremendous number of subtests in it, and this is to help you break apart what's working and what isn't working in the working memory area. And we'll look further at what you can do in that area in just a moment. And then finally, there are 3 subtests in the expanded processing speed ancillary index scale. Moving back over to the left to verbal comprehension, you'll see we also have a verbal reasoning scale. This is made up of similarities, comprehension, and set relations, which is a new subtest that I'll say more about in a moment. And this, of course, is looking at the ability to use verbal information to reason and problem solve. On the fluid side, we have a quantitative reasoning ancillary scale that includes figure weights and arithmetic. It's helpful when you have folks who have difficulty working with numbers, who have perhaps math learning disabilities or learning disorder, and can be helpful. It's also, interestingly, a good predictor of performance in academic areas and highly correlated with the full-scale IQ. Move over one more column, and we're looking at the working memory again. Notice that we have ancillary scales that break down visual working memory and auditory working memory. Visual working memory is made up of 2 new subtests that come over from the WIMS, symbol span and spatial addition. And then we have 2 auditory working memory scales. One looks solely at registration, the ability to hold information in mind, and the other, auditory working memory manipulation, is looking at the ability to transform that information in some way, resequence it, or work on it in another way. So we can really get a good idea of what is and isn't working in the working memory area. Finally, under processing speed, we have 2 more ancillary index scales. One is a reduced motor processing speed. So this has reduced motor requirements. And this is helpful when you have someone with a tremor, someone with other kinds of motor problems that may slow them down. And then down below that, you'll see we have a fully non-motor ancillary index scale. This is made up of similarities, vocabulary, visual puzzles, matrix reasoning, figure weights, digit sequencing, and a new subtest called naming speed quantity, which requires no motor output. None of these subtests require motor output. So this, in addition to being great for those with motor difficulties, is ideal for using for remote administration. Notice that block design is not included there, nor do you have to send out response booklets to do coding or symbol search. We've substituted for those. So we've listened to you. We know a lot of you do remote testing as well as in-person testing, and now we've got a great way for you to do that. Over in the far right-hand column, you should see some things you're familiar with, and that is a general ability index, a GAI. I like to think of this as kind of the horsepower, excuse me, the heavy lifting that we ask the brain to do in terms of cognitive abilities, whereas the cognitive proficiency index is the other side of things. These are the more fundamental abilities like working memory and processing speed, okay? And they help with doing the general ability tasks more fluently, more quickly, and more easily, okay? But they can also be measured on their own to see if they're having an effect on general ability or on full-scale IQ. Finally, we have a nonverbal ancillary index scale, and this is great for folks with language disabilities, those for whom English is not their first language, and other things that might interfere with their ability to do linguistic tasks. Well, to make room for all of that, we had to say goodbye to some subtests. We are leaving behind picture completion and cancellation. Picture completion, it turns out, the construct it's testing is not really as representative of visual spatial ability as the other tasks that we've left in. We also wanted to decrease the emphasis on speed in that area, and we found that it's not frequently used. It's probably the least frequently used of all the subtests in WAIS. So that's one that we're saying goodbye to. The other is cancellation, which interestingly has a very low G loading and a relatively low correlation with the other tasks in the processing speed area. We've also found it's not very clinically sensitive in adults. It does well on the WISC with younger children, but if in adults, if you're looking to determine if there's visual neglect, there are other measures available that do a much better job of that. And we also wanted to replace it with a motor-free processing speed measure, and that is, I'm going to forget the name of it now. We just looked at it. It's a fluency task where there is no motor involvement whatsoever. And that's, I now got it. It's naming speed quantity. And you can say hello to some new subtests. We're not going to go over these in detail today, but if you go to our web page for WAIS, you will see that we did a whole webinar on these new subtests, and you can learn how to do them, what they measure, and so forth. There's set relations, which contributes to the fluid reasoning index, running digits, a new working memory score, naming speed quantity, there's the one I couldn't find, that contributes to the processing speed index, symbol span, and spatial addition, which contribute only to the ancillary index scales, okay, and also appear on WIMS. Here are the special group studies. The first one is intellectually gifted, and I want to mention that since it's not elsewhere in this presentation, that there are special start points, advanced start points for those you assume or guess may be intellectually gifted or are there for an evaluation for giftedness. It's going to cut down the time significantly that it takes to assess a gifted individual, which is really nice. We also have intellectual disability, mild and moderate, SLD in reading and math, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, TBI, both moderate or severe, mild cognitive impairment, and probable dementia of the Alzheimer's type, and that's a mild severity. I mentioned expanded clinical utility. As you've seen in the slides we've shown so far, we have broader construct coverage for working memory, for fluid reasoning, and for processing speed. We have new expanded index scores that help you increase the interpretive clarity of the results you're getting. And we have new index scales that reduce the confounds of expressive language or motor problems. And also, as we saw, we have one that's ideal for remote testing. And those are the nonverbal index, the non-motor index, and the motor reduced processing speed index. Improved user experience, also a big one. We have simplified the administration and scoring directions. You won't have to feel like you're talking and talking and talking to explain a task. We've made it easier for you to say and easier for your client to understand. We also have multiple options for the administration, scoring, and reporting of the WAIS. You can use the traditional paper and pencil kit, and you can score it by hand, or you can score it using Q Global. We also have Q Interactive, our system where you use two iPads, one that takes the place of your record form and your examiner's manual, and the other that takes the place of stimulus books for your examinee. There are no record forms required, and scoring and reporting are included. They're actually done by Q Global. Q Interactive in the background calls on Q Global, takes the information from your practitioner iPad, and automatically scores and reports for you, producing the same report you would get in Q Global. Let's talk a little bit about training options. We have a 3-hour WAIS-5 overview training that will take you a lot deeper than this overview. We have options in this for both individuals or groups. We have per seat availability. That is, you can sign up as an individual for this for $99. And if you have a group of 3 or more, the price is reduced. I believe it's down to 80 and some change. We also have webinar or in-person options for the overview training so that you can schedule it for your clinic, your hospital, whatever milieu you work in. Now we also have advanced training available. So this is called WAIS-5 Interpretation, Instruction, and Intervention Implications. This is a live webinar, again, 3 hours, okay? And then as a follow-on, we have a live question and answer virtual webinar, which is 1 hour. And this is typically done after you've had your initial training. You've had a chance to work with the WAIS a little bit, and your questions are coming up. Well, I got this answer, or I wasn't quite sure how to do that. And here we're going to answer all your questions in an hour. And soon we are also going to add on a new training, which is WAIS-5 on Q Interactive, which I'm sure many of you are waiting for. And you can look at our website for the availability of these. Excuse me. We also have additional WAIS-5 resources. I apologize. I know you can't click on these right now, but if you go to the WAIS-5 web page, there's lots of information on there. There's an FAQ. There are links to blogs. There's send me more information. There's, as you see on the bottom, find your Pearson assessment consultant. You can ask that one of us, the one that works with folks in your part of the country, to be in touch with you to answer questions. So lots more resources for you to call on. And you can check out our website for even more. As I mentioned, we have recorded webinars. Most of these are an hour long. One of them is solely on the new subtests in the WAIS-5. One focuses solely on the ancillary index scales, gives you a lot more information on what they tell you and when you might want to use them. We have one on identifying clinical subgroups, and then another webinar that I gave a few months ago called Using WAIS-5 in Private Practice, which will help you with your most common referral questions and look at how to use the WAIS-5 to address those. In addition, we have blogs, the most recent ones being the excitement surrounding the WAIS-5 and its importance for you as a clinician, and then introducing WAIS-5 on Q Interactive. With that, I am going to stop and take questions from you. I think Erin is going to magically appear and share some of those questions, and we'll get to as many as we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Gail. Lots of great questions coming in. We did have a few questions about handouts of the previous subtests. webinar that we did, and so we will be sending that out to everyone that attended this webinar today, to make sure that we get that link of handouts out to you, because there were so many people that requested that. So we'll make sure to get that
Great.
out to everyone today, just to help people with getting that info. We'll just go ahead and send that out to everybody. Okay, so Gail, could you talk to us a little bit more about what is required for administering FSIQ? We got the question. There's 7 subtests, right, that contribute to FSIQ, but there is an 8th subtest that is administered with digits forward. Can you share some information on that with the group?
Sure. Now, the full-scale IQ, just as with WAIS-4, is made up of 7 subtests. So 7 subtest scores will contribute to getting your full-scale IQ. But when you're doing the administration, you will actually have to administer 8 subtests. The 8th subtest, which is digits forward, is only going to take you about 1 minute. You give it directly before digit sequencing, because that's the way we prepared folks when we standardized the test, but you will not include the score from digits forward in getting your full-scale IQ. And you won't need to worry about this. If you're using Q Global to score, or you're administering using Q Interactive, it knows that even though you may have entered data from that, it's not going to use it to roll up into the full-scale IQ. So you give 8 subtests, but only 7 are aggregated to give us a full-scale IQ.
Great, thank you so much. Another question came in about the digital options, and if you still need paper response booklets when administering digitally on Q Interactive.
When you're administering on Q Interactive, if you want to give coding and symbol search, you do need paper response booklets. But if you're doing the non-motor ancillary scale, you will not need them, because those two subtests, coding and symbol search, are not included in the non-motor index. So they should not show up if you select the VMI, the NVI, nonverbal. No, I got that wrong. It's the non-motor index. We have so many to choose from now. The NMI. We need to get used to new acronyms. You will not need the response booklets.
Great. We've gotten a few questions in about working with kids versus adults, and I know there's an overlap for examinees that are age 16. Can you talk a little bit about just when you would choose to use the WAIS or the WISC, and what types of differences you might see?
Sure. So the WISC and the WAIS, as you say, you have that overlap for the 16-year-olds. If you have what you suspect is a lower functioning individual that you're testing, you probably want to go with the WISC because it has a lower floor. Whereas if you suspect that this is a higher functioning individual, you're probably going to want to go with the WAIS because it has a higher ceiling. Now, other things that might make your choice, if you're testing remotely, you might want to go with the WAIS because it has an easy way to do a remote testing. Okay. The other thing is, although both subtests require 10, both tests require 10 subtests. If you want all 5 of the primary index scores, it's going to take you less time to give all 10 of those on WAIS. So if you have someone that you feel is easily fatigued or may have trouble getting through the length of the test, you might lean toward the WAIS.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're all out of time. I know this was a quick webinar today, but we wanted to get out there and make sure we could provide answers to many of our customers. Thank you for all this information, Gail, and thank you to everyone that was able to join us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.